May 20th, 2020. It was just after midnight that I got a call from the hospital that told me to get there quickly. Now, I'm a nurse, and I've made these calls. I eerily understood that the universe has shifted on its axis and my world would never be the same. But I didn't ask questions, I just started to move. And typically, when I move in this direction, I just focus on the work, what needs to be done. It's a casualty of the career. We're there for people in the times of tragedy, but this was different because this was personal. This was my family. And I couldn't get myself together, so I asked my son Nathan to join me. And he agreed. He said, yes, ma'am. But you got to know Nathan. He's my gentle giant. He's my forever Clark Kent. He is so meek and mild and quiet, but absolute in his decisions. Like when he's made a choice, his yay is his yay, and his nay is his nay. So we get to the emergency room because we have to go to the emergency room. It's late, and we're patted down by the security guard who has to do that before he escorts us to the room. And I understood what I could possibly see when I went into the room. But it hadn't struck me how Nathan would feel about what he would possibly see when he got to the room. So as we approached the room, we're getting closer to the door, and I paused and I turned slightly to Nathan, who shifted his weight and his body almost to lock shoulders with me. And in that, he said without words, we're in this together. Bracing, we entered the room to a group of people feverishly trying to keep my husband and his father alive. A young nurse walked up to me. She's pale and exhausted, and she says, we've been doing this for over 45 minutes. And I said, has he had any evidence of return? And she said, no, ma'am. What would you have us to do? I looked at my husband, whose lifeless body was there, and they were working, but I knew what I saw. And so I said, it's okay. He can go. And in that moment, it felt like an atomic bomb of silence came into the room, like a smoke cloud of just quiet. And it seemed like it lasted forever. And then the silence was broke with the male's voice that said, time of death. The next voice that I heard, and the only voice that I heard at that moment, was Nathan, as he looked up at the clock and said, 12:45. It seemed like the room emptied, and it was just Nathan and I at that moment. And we stayed there for a little while together, and Nathan prayed. And then we walked back down the same hall we'd come up, feeling both hollow and heavy at the same time. The car ride home was really quiet. And then when we got home, it was even more quiet. It's almost as if we were walking around a house like mice in a maze and bumping off of each other, but we didn't ask any questions. We couldn't form any questions. And then we prepared ourselves because I knew I had to call his family and let them know. I called my sister-in-law, and she answered the phone. I was barely able to mutter the words, he's gone. And she responded with this really odd quiet. And then she said, they just called us into the hospital. See, my mother-in-law was also in the hospital in Birmingham, and she had developed COVID, and they didn't think that she was going to make it. In fact, later that day, around 6 p.m., they called to let us know that she had also passed. In that moment, everything shifted to Nathan for me. I had lost my husband and my mother-in-law, but he had lost his father and his grandma. And I figured that what he needed more than anything at that moment was a mom. And so that was where my effort went. Well, we understood, though, that it would be difficult for the family to participate in 2 funeral services in 2 locations, and so we made the decision to ship my husband to Birmingham to be buried with his mother. Nathan and I were both shocked, and we were numb, but we knew more than anything that my husband would want to go back to Birmingham. And so we did what we had to do to prepare him to go. And then we took a familiar, long 8.5-hour drive to Birmingham, mostly in silence. Now, I could see that Nathan was processing by the way that he was breathing. He had these long exhalations that felt like they were pregnant with questions. But he didn't ask anything, and I couldn't ask him any questions. Although I wanted to, I just couldn't speak the words. And every once in a while, I can feel him look over at me, and I would look out the window to avoid the gaze. I just wasn't ready. And honestly, I didn't think I would ever be ready. We got through the drive and we pulled into my sister-in-law's house, and I went to my natural default. I went to work, visiting grave sites, picking out clothes, picking out caskets, picking out flowers, writing an obituary for someone I just didn't think was finished living. I knew how to work, I just didn't know how to feel. And I was there, but I really wasn't present. And in my mind, I had a cloud of questions that I anticipated that people would ask, like, what happened? How did it happen? And then I anticipated questions that people would not even ask, like, how are you? Will you be able to make it? And I just didn't want Nathan to ask any questions. And so I continued to work. I put everything into work. It was the longest week. We did all that we could. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't wrap my mind around everything. And a couple of days before the service, my cousin approached me and said, you need to get it together. You're going to get sick. And I said to her, I'm trying. And she said, let's go out. So she tried to take me out to get some fresh air. I refused. She tried to get me to eat. I refused. And after multiple attempts of trying to support me, she said, fine. If you're not going to do anything but sit in this bed, you just need to relax. So she left the room, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I'm looking at the television, and I'm seeing this movie on that I've seen maybe 1,000,000 times, but I couldn't wrap my mind about the concept of the movie. She came back in, and she gave me some candy in a bowl. And initially, I was like, I'm good. She was like, no, these are the best candies ever. You'll thank me later. And I thought, whatever. So as she left out of the room, I grabbed the candy and I ate them. A gummy. It was good. And in my mind, I was thinking that I started to just speak out loud all the questions I had in my mind, like, what's happening? How did I get here? How am I going to be a widow before I'm 50? Like, how is this all coming together? And I felt my anxiety starting to rev up, and I instinctively grabbed a gummy. And I ate the gummy, and then after a short while, I noticed that my lips were tingling a little bit. And I thought, well, maybe the anxiety is getting to me a little bit more than I thought. So I lay back in the bed and put the candy dish beside me. And then I started to look at the TV, and all of a sudden, it came to me, and I came up with a full physiological narrative of why white men can't jump. I just laid there and watching the movie, and then I thought, this candy really is good. So I took another one, and then, as if the light switch had went off and the floodgates had opened, I cried. I cried. And I didn't realize I hadn't cried until that moment. And I cried, and I ate candy. And then I cried and I ate candy. And then it was almost as if the answers to all of the questions that I had been asking in my mind started to download. And it was like Microphone Man. Remember when your mom passed, you made it. And then remember when dad passed, you made it. And when you and your husband couldn't figure out how to pay the bills and you didn't know if you were going to make it, you made it. And all of the questions started coming through, and even questions like, if you don't know the answers to the question, if they ask them, just smile and nod. You'll make it. And I continued to get all of these questions answered, and they were coming fast and furious. And then I felt like I wanted to grab another gummy, but they were gone. So I lay back and I slept. The next day I woke up. No, everything was not okay. But I was present. And I realized that a lot of the questions and concerns that I had was clearer. And then I stretched and I yawned and I looked over at the empty candy dish and I thought to myself, you can learn a lot from a gummy.